I'm so grateful to former President Mary McAleese for being here. I know I emotionally blackmailed you to beat the band.
This is true.
This is true. She won't deny it. To argue the case for a presence and keynote speaker appearance. And I was delighted, absolutely ecstatic to have word come through to affirm that that would be the case this year around. Now, we've had to change location, so next year it'll be Galway. Sorry, Galway this year for having to displace the plans and all that.
But Galway got a new president, so.
Yeah.
Two in a row.
Exactly. We might come back to that a little bit later. No, it's true though. And so Athlone is kind of the heart of the Midlands and the heart of the country, and it's the kind of centre, of us as a nation. So I don't think I've ever been in a PSI conference as frequently as I have been at the Athlone-based ones. So yeah, without further ado, how do I do this? How do I? We asked you for a keynote speech, and you were like, no.
No.
Yeah.
No. You just looked down at our row of faces, going, "Oh God, not another bloody keynote speech."
Yeah.
Yeah. Shoot me now. So I think conversation. Put it like this. First of all, it's easier. I don't spend a month writing a speech that bores people to death. And second of all, you just can enter, particularly with Q&As and that, and with you can enter into where people are at, and I like that. Yeah. More conversational.
So we'll do
also, my husband will have a bet on with you to see how many questions you will actually get to squeeze in.
Okay. Yeah, I have some documentation of. Anyway, we'll come to you, Martin, in a minute. No, but I agree with you. I think
Martin's just going. Look how many questions he thinks he's going to ask. Yeah, this will be fun.
We have a plan for a conversation arc. We'll see where we land.
Exactly. Let's
but
see where
you
we go.
What? It doesn't really matter because we will never achieve what we could ultimately get out of a conversation, which would require far more than 1 hour. Yeah. And I think Q&A is definitely a very prioritised and important aspect.
Well, I think it's very respectful of the audience too. That it keeps you awake.
And we have some people in the audience who I think will I hope, contribute to that. So we are in for a treat for the next hour. On stage, we have someone who is from modest, humble beginnings, grew up in a household with sign language as part of the household, whose parents were devout Catholics, who's highly educated, had to go abroad for some of that education, who's undertaken some of these studies in foreign lands, but also widely admired, not afraid to ruffle feathers and agitate where necessary, and eventually becoming president of the PSI in 2025. That's just me. So as for our guest, I don't know where to start with you.
Yeah. Not just any old place at all.
No, I know. I genuinely don't. And I hope the conversation will maybe draw some of that out. And I don't want to waste too much time on a formal introduction, but born one of 9 siblings, I think, of 11 pregnancies, born into the Ardoyne, which
don't
is
call it the Ardoyne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
You're
how
doing that deliberately,
named.
aren't you, now, to provoke? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know. And
I just lived in Ardoyne. And as soon as the troubles hit suddenly on the BBC, it was the Ardoyne.
Yeah.
And I just kind of felt that suddenly othered us. So even today when I hear that expression, the Ardoyne, something in me, says, hang on a minute now. It was never the Ardoyne. And that bothers me, I have to say.
Yeah.
Because it's subtle, and for most people it probably means nothing. But if you're on the receiving end of it, you're all psychologists, you know this. If you're on the receiving end of it, how it's received can be hurtful. You can almost accept the otheredness and the feeling of being put out to a margin somewhere, being put out in such a way that you're just not as mainstream maybe as you thought you were, and that always has bothered me greatly.
And I'm glad you raised that because I grew up with it being known as the Ardoyne.
Yeah, a lot of people
I didn't know until I read your memoir or heard it on the audio version that it was Ardoyne, not
just
the
Ardoyne. Yeah. I mean, today people who live in Ardoyne. I am from Ardoyne, which is North Belfast, the area of Belfast. Anybody here from Belfast?
Yes.
Yes, thank goodness. Well, there are. You will know that it's a place that was deeply implicated in the years of the Troubles, and it was the place with the greatest incidence per capita of sectarian murders, bar none, in Northern Ireland. So it was, it had a lot of problems. When I was growing up, it had 70% unemployment. What has it got today? 70% unemployment.
Really?
Yeah, there you go. So, and I think a lot of us, there am I, and I'm not living there anymore, a lot of us who were the beneficiaries of education. I was born immediately after the Second World War, at a time when the British government introduced, in the Butler Act, free second level education, the best thing it ever did, and the best thing that was ever done here in the Republic. A generation later, over 20 years later, was the introduction of free second level education, because it helped to dig deep into the resource base that was previously wasted, and allow people to flourish and blossom and be whatever they wanted to be, and break down the barriers of elitism in professions. All of that. I was part of that generation. Seamus Heaney describes it brilliantly, the impact of free second level education, that contrast between my parents' generation. My mum left school at 15, became a hairdresser. My dad left school up the road here, he's from North Roscommon, left school at 14. Now, whatever education they got, it was a good one. As I warned you about the question thing. But just making that point that, like, my mum would love to have gone to college, my dad would love to have gone to college. It was an absolute total impossibility for them, given the circumstances they grew up in. But for my generation, it became a distinct possibility. Yeah. And because you had massified second level, you had massified third level, which in my time was also was free. And so, like, suddenly we had oodles of possibilities that had not been open to the previous generation. Yeah. But Seamus Heaney, was going to say, in his poem From the Canton of Expectation, describes my generation that went into the colleges and the professions as having intelligences brightened and unmannerly as crowbars. It's brilliant, isn't it?
Beautiful.
Absolutely brilliant. And then shortly after that, he says, that what looks the strongest has outlived its term. What looks the strongest has outlived its term. The future lies with what's affirmed from under. And that was our time. That was my time. People who had been othered, like the Ardoyne, who had been regarded as irrelevant, voiceless, not worth noticing. Suddenly their views, their energy, their creativity, their imagination, and importantly their voices and experience were bubbling to the surface and changing things. And they did. Took a while, but they did, quite radically.
Now, Martin told me that you're not easy to get talking, which I'm
he's
not sure.
He's a bit of a talker himself,
yeah,
actually.
I think he's unreliable as a source there. But I do have to, before you rudely interrupted me there now, I do have to credit you for many accolades. I won't go through them all because they'll come out in the wash of the chat. And look at the audience, we have a packed house here. Don't be under any illusion that this isn't because of me. It's because of you.
Right.
No, genuinely, and I've heard this over the last couple of days as I've, prepared and panicked and freaked out and, had anxiety moments, etc. With colleagues and peers. The admiration and affection for you is genuinely deeply felt, widely felt, recognised, regardless of what side of the political spectrum one might be on. There's a universality to it, which I think ultimately was your objective and your goal. And I praise you for that, but I also recognise maybe the combo, the Batman and Robin kind of aspect. I'm not saying who's who, but that there might be or have been to that, because it was very much a collaborative effort. Is that okay to say that?
It is, well, absolutely, because when I was elected, actually before I was elected at all, in 1997, when we were talking to the then leader of the Fianna Fáil party, Bertie Ahern, about the possibility.
A notoriously pacifist party, I might say.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
But interestingly, Martin said to him, at the time, if he said, I believe Mary's probably going to be elected. At that time, Fianna Fáil were in the 40%, so in a sense, the election was mine to lose. Really, and it's very different from now. I won't go into that. And but very
go
different.
into that. Yeah.
But literally, I mean, the numbers were there, and I had them on side and at the PDs. But Martin said to him, and he was in a very lucrative dental practice that he had worked very hard to build up. He said, I'll give that up. He said, because I really want to commit to the Building Bridges project. He's an East Belfast boy. I'm a North Belfast girl. We both lived through the Troubles. We both lost our homes through the Troubles.
Yeah.
We were confronted with options that appealed to people that we grew up with who ended up in paramilitarism, because that was an option. And I grew up in a Protestant area, Martin grew up in a Protestant area. And we both knew people from the Catholic cohort, and in my case also from the Protestant cohort, who ended up in paramilitarism. And we both kind of figured out from first principles, this is a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
We both figured out from first principles that violence was utterly a zero-sum game. It was in a small community among neighbours who feared, hated, disliked, didn't know each other, and who were always going to be neighbours, that this was really, honestly, to put a word in it, stupid. Yeah. And we were lucky. We also were very grateful for that we were the generation who had other options. We could go into the professions. We could stand our ground in different ways. And we could say, we could say things that countered, if you like, the default narrative. The default narrative, and it's not just of Northern Ireland, it's actually almost of the world, the default narrative of violence. Solve problems with a gun, with hatred, with fear, and we know that it doesn't solve problems, just doesn't. Creates more problems, and it makes the tangled web of relationships all the stickier to unravel. Who am I talking to? An audience of psychologists.
Well,
so
there's one psychiatrist in the
so
front
difficult.
There, and, sorry, like we'll forgive him, or we'll give him a pass for now. But also it's probably it is important not to overlook also Martin's, like there's a spectacular aspect to Martin as well. Besides the humanity and all the rest. I think first ever minor footballer, wasn't he?
Oh, please don't start with this great
he
was.
Football. It's
please.
important to acknowledge that. It's an accolade. First ever minor footballer for the GA to be returned home, paid by the GA to play.
To come home during the summer.
I don't think everyone appreciates
swear to
that.
God,
There's a bit of a
never got
shocked
over
and stunned audience. There is there's a deserved...
I'll say, actually, apropos of that, Martin had, when I first knew him as a 17-year-old handsome fellow with hair, as opposed to the almost 75-year-old but no hair, but still handsome in my view. And like we're 50 years married next year, so
wonderful.
Still there.
Wonderful.
So, but the extraordinary thing was, anyway, he was captain of the Antrim minor football team, which in Belfast was really mega, and he thought he was gorgeous. Of course, I did too. And but then he went to Queen's, and he was in a famous team that won a Sigerson Cup medal.
Yes.
Anyway, when we got married, he was very caught, and a McKenna Cup medal. Am I right now?
He was punching.
And
he knows
he kept these so carefully to hand on to his children, his great tales, because he got a new knee last year, which was after 40-odd years of suffering as a result of a wound incurred playing Gaelic football, which put an end to his what would have been a stellar senior football career.
Obviously.
So he had the whole narrative lined up for his children. Here's why I didn't win an All-Ireland medal for Antrim, but here are my 2 medals, here am I, the Gaelic hero. And then, anyway, into our kitchen one day when we were living in the Áras, strode this big, 6'2" lad from Kerry, from Valentia Island. And anyway, he was introduced to us by our daughter. She was then 21. And this lad comes in anyway, very confident. And Martin looked up and we're introduced to him, and who is he? Only Mick O'Connell's son.
Which is
now, anybody who
incredible.
doesn't know Mick O'Connell, God help you, he has 6 All-Ireland medals. He captained the Kerry football team. He's one of the legends of Gaelic football. And into the kitchen comes the man to whom she's now married. And Martin just went, bastard.
Yeah. Hold on. Hey.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, language
Sigerson
now.
Cup
I've been
medals,
told
McKenna Cup medals, in the bin.
We need to keep this
Complete
past
waste
the 9
of time.
threshold news.
Yeah.
You know, sorry.
Yeah.
On behalf of my guest, apologies. You know, I know it's highly unusual that it would be her and not me.
Yeah.
But
No, I may as well just tell the truth. He was
Yeah.
just completely, absolutely
I agree.
eviscerated, emasculated in that moment.
Shame
anyway,
on you, Martin. Shame on you.
Anyway, the good news is they're now great friends.
Yeah.
They're
Which
great
is
pals.
beautiful. That's a lovely narrative,
Yeah.
isn't it? Like, you know,
They're great
there's
pals.
a loveliness to that. I was in my local. I now live in Dunleary, and my local there's a couple of places, but one is McKenna's.
Oh, the pub.
And I've learned I've learned a few things about
My
you.
bowl told for years.
Arthur, the grandchild,
Yeah.
the grandson of the original
Art,
Arthur,
yeah. As we
who
know. Yeah.
taught your father.
Yeah.
It was a lovely.
My dad lived there.
I know.
My dad lived there.
Yeah.
My dad moved from Belfast with them because first of all they moved to Milltown.
That's right.
My father was a barman in their pub in Belfast.
Yeah.
And we became just such close friends.
He has asked me
and
to
pals.
ask you about. We'll come to it later.
Yeah.
The Banafi. Anyway, look.
But that was our bowl toll
Yeah.
during the Troubles when things got really bad. We would just get on the train, come down to Dublin, go out to Dunleary, stay with the McKennas, and it was an oasis. And they're just such a fabulous family.
But
God
they
rest
speak
them.
very lovely
All
of
dead
you.
now. All our generation, all dead now.
Yeah, but they speak lovely of you.
But they're our family, and they became. Yeah, I guess they were the oasis, and I think everybody in Northern Ireland needed an oasis at times. You know, if you ever went up to Donegal for the weekend, I remember often on a Friday evening when you just had Belfast up to here, and you couldn't take any more. You know, of the daily grim statistics and the worry and the bombs and the debt and all of that, and you would get into the car and you'd drive, up to Donegal. And hours in the car, and you'd get out in Gweedore or Rathmullen or whatever. The first people you'd walk into were all the people you'd left behind in Belfast. They'd all done the same thing. We'd all had the same idea: get out of here, because our heads were wrecked with it.
Can we get into that?
Yeah.
A little bit more, because I know the name of the talk. Not that it really matters that much, but surviving and thriving. There's no word of a lie in that. Like, when I listen back to your memoir, some of the incidents and chapters relating to family attacks that were personalised, your brother John, that's how I got to you, by the way. John,
my brother,
is your
who's
brother,
deaf.
one of 9 siblings, and he's part of the deaf community. I emotionally blackmailed the deaf community to get to Mary. That's how this has come
it's
about.
easily done.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it's not that easily. I'm not sure it's easily done, but we somehow got it over the line. But John's a beautiful boy. My brother describes him as a very funny person.
He is. He's
but I know
hilarious.
he's had hardship as well. Now, he's not the only one in the family that's had hardship. When I listen to some of the chapters that you describe and articulate in the audiobook of your life history, I'm actually flummoxed. I know of it, but I don't really. It's when you hear it up front and personal. Ardoyne, you say highest per capita,
Sectarian murders.
sectarian
bar
murder.
none.
1 in 5. 1 in 5.
They were people we knew, I grew up with, went
Your
to
neighbours.
school with, were neighbours.
Yeah.
I said we lived in the Protestant area of Ardoyne, so my immediate neighbours were all Protestant. There was only a handful of Catholics on the road that I lived in, which is an extension of the Shankill Road. And the complexity of Northern Ireland is such that among the neighbours that we were really, really close to, it was a family who their eldest daughter Anna was my younger sister Catherine was her bridesmaid, and they were a Plymouth Brethren family, and the kindness of them in the year that my sister was the bridesmaid for their eldest daughter, they bought and paid for my sister's outfit for as a bridesmaid. She would have been maybe 8 or 9, and maybe a flower girl's better description of her.
Innocent.
And they bought her a white, beautiful, magnificent white dress, knowing that later that year she was going to be making her first communion. Now, the kindness and the generosity and the thoughtfulness that went into that is something very special. Anyway, their younger son went on to join the UVF, Loyalist Paramilitary Organisation. And he went out one night with a group from the Woodvale, I lived on the Woodvale Road, sort of Woodvale paramilitary haunt. And over the course of a couple of days, he murdered 4 Catholics. They murdered 4 Catholics, including a young 17-year-old girl who was serving petrol at a petrol station. And they also killed a man who was walking past Ardoyne. Now, where they lived and we lived was right behind Ardoyne Church, the big Catholic church in Ardoyne. We lived behind this big, massive granite wall. But on the other side of the wall was the Crumlin Road, where the entrance to the church was. And there was a man walking past that. And this group of young paramilitaries, absolutely inflamed with passion and anger because of something the IRA had done a couple of days before. This is tit for tat, tit for tat. They saw this guy walking past Ardoyne Chapel and presumed wrongly that he was Catholic, and they shot him. Now, directly opposite that was a shop, newsagents, and a sweet shop run by my cousin Paddy. And it was early in the morning, and this guy was on his way to work in the docks, walking past. And my cousin Paddy ran out when he heard the shot and saw the man lying dying. And went over, because just the way in which he was shot, I won't go into it, but he actually knew him, but didn't recognize him in that moment. But he did the thing that Catholics are kind of trained to do in those circumstances. He whispered what we call an act of contrition in his ear. That's where you say you're sorry for all your sins and you hope God will forgive them, and you go straight to heaven. Now, he did that, and the man died in his presence.
Mary, what do you mean by trained to do?
Well, as Catholics, as part of, it's just part of what you grow up with. You know that if you're in that, you hope you'll never be in it, but you know that that's something that you should kind of do. But anyway, he did it. The most important thing is he did it. And unfortunately for Paddy, that experience, like a similar experience for my own father, who had the experience of having a young girl die in his arms because of a car bomb, it broke him, emotionally and mentally. So there's the impact that gets lost in the telling, gets lost. Anyway, more important.
How widely do you perceive that, though?
Oh, look, I think Northern Ireland, in my experience, we never ever know the depths of despair and distress and brokenness that lies in the hearts of people who are either stoically putting up with it, or don't even have the capacity to admit to themselves how damaged they are by everything that's gone on in their lives. I mean, the best speech I ever heard on what happened in Northern Ireland and the impact, the downstream cascading impact, of imbalance and dysfunction and lack of confidence and all of that, and relationship mess, all of that, was by a guy called David Campbell. Is he on the Loyalist, one of the Loyalist Command? Great guy. Absolutely great guy. He gave a speech in DCU a couple of years ago.
God forbid a loyalist is a great guy.
This guy was unbelievable. Yeah. This guy was unbelievable. Yeah. He spoke about people living on cans and cocaine and drugs and dysfunction, and I thought, oh my, and this was all directly stress-related to the Troubles. It was the downstream consequence that never really gets talked about much, except probably by people like you who live with the consequences, in a professional capacity. The best speech I ever heard, because a lot of the time post the Good Friday Agreement, there was a tendency towards Pollyanna, happy clappy, forgetting the amount of work that had to be done in terms of rebuilding individuals and attempting reconciliation then. Between communities that were living side by side, cheek by jowl, but were estranged, and that's I think that's one of the big stories of Northern Ireland, is the lack of investment in that reality, that the suffering. Like, to be honest, we were a people who decided sometime in our lives that we didn't dare to talk about the impact on ourselves because there was always somebody worse. And
How
so
Catholic,
you had this.
how Catholic is that, though?
It is very, and
Yeah.
but it's not
Anyone
just
raised
the
Catholic
Catholic
will probably
community. You
relate to
find
that.
that. I mean, there's great
Yeah.
suffering right across all communities in Northern Ireland, and
Absolutely.
a tendency to to accept the belief in a kind of a hierarchy of martyrdom or a hierarchy of victimhood, which tends then to silence.
Yeah.
It just tends to silence.
Well, not you. Not you.
No, well, no, but
Yeah.
it took. With the greatest respect, though, I mean, I
Your
look now,
parents,
I'm-
I want to acknowledge your parents in that, though. 'Cause
Yeah,
they were devout Catholics, you know,
Yeah.
Christians, but of a certain breed. Not the expected breed.
You didn't go around parading your grief. You didn't
Yeah.
go around parading.
You lived it.
Yeah.
You didn't.
You know
didn't
what? You just
protest it,
internalized
you
it.
just
I don't
lived
think
it.
it was. I honestly don't think it was wild healthy, to be honest. My father has mentioned the loyalists left a car bomb designed to kill my father outside a pub that he had, and anyway, it went off, and my father had luckily cleared the bar. Everybody had been got out the back door, and he just went to the front where the car bomb was to make sure everybody was okay. The bloody thing went off. Sorry, bad language again. But the thing went off,
They
and
are used to worse than that.
yeah, it went off, and there was a young girl, sister of a good friend of mine, mother of 3 children. She was across the road. She'd heard people, the warning, but she was worried that one of her children was still on the street. As it turned out, the child was safe. Somebody had already grabbed the child. The child was fine. But she ran across the street. My father saw her running, and believe it or not, it's just the strangest, stupidest thing. It was the keys of the car that broke her neck, and she died instantly.
Yeah.
You'd hardly credit it. And because my father ran and grabbed her, thinking she'd just fainted, because there wasn't a mark on her, And it was at that time for police and ambulance to arrive into the Falls Road was a bit of a palaver. They were always expecting that they would be then the victims of a setup or attack, so they were slow to respond to events like that. And their fear about being set up was well placed. I mean, it was not. It was a thing. It was a real thing. So they were slow to respond. The first people on the scene, indeed the first person on the scene, was an RTE cameraman. Could they listen in on the police radio? Sorry, I shouldn't say this, but people were listening in on police radios, so they knew where the events were. They raced to the scene, and the first person on the scene, as I was, a cameraman. And in the great nature of things, I got to know that cameraman later when I worked in RTE, such a fine fellow, Eugene McVeigh. And Eugene was able to tell me something that I didn't know, because my father went out that morning, Mr. Happy Clappy, great fun. My dad was, raconteur, typical, publican, hail fellow, well met, full of oil crack. I don't know who he was when he came back, but he suffered clearly from what then became a catatonic depression. Nowadays, post-traumatic stress or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was a different person when he came home. And we had no idea. We were just saying, who is he? What happened here? And we didn't know, but Eugene McVeigh was able to tell me that he had been able to gently tell my father, actually, she's dead. What an awful thing to have to do. Now, years later, I knew Eugene as a cameraman, great, fantastic person, one of the nicest people I ever met in the broadcasting industry. Who was his brother? Columba McVeigh.
Oh.
Now, so the suffering that was in him, and he never mentioned it, never mentioned the suffering he was carrying of a young brother who is still one of the disappeared. They've never found his body. The IRA did something shocking to him, something rotten to him, for reasons that have absolutely no justification in the wide world. A young fella, and body disappeared, and the child disappeared. He's only, what was he even 18 or 19? And that was Eugene. So, this is in that small, little section of 3 or 4 people, just look at the suffering and the loss and the anxiety that people have carried over a lifetime. And I'm the oldest of the 9, and I can look down through the 9, and my mum and her sisters, and her siblings, between them, have 60 children, because my family thought they had to increase, multiply, and fill the earth entirely by themselves. That's a very Catholic thing as well. And
Nightmare.
And they almost succeeded. And but I look at across that great experience growing up of all those personalities that you were always kind of like in an amateur psychological forum, and seeing how not everybody reacts the same way, Damien.
Yeah,
not everybody has the same skill set. Not everybody has the same resilience. Some break under the burden of hopelessness and of hurt and of disappointment, just pure disappointment in humanity. And others live with the glass half full. I'm a half full person. Others are half empty, or more than that.
Do you agree, Martin?
Yeah.
Sorry. That was just a thought that came into the, no need to answer.
Well, look, I mean, there's no point in saying his mommy's classic example, God rest her dear soul. Like, the Loyalists came into their house. They lived on the East Belfast on the Albert Bridge Road.
Because you grew up in a Loyalist area as well.
Yeah, he grew up. Yeah. And Martin will tell you, he couldn't even go for a pot of jam in the local shop as a youngster without being terrified he'd been beaten up or murdered, because it was a very, very sectarian environment. Like, a pot of jam, in the name of God. So accrete that and accumulate that, and you wonder why. And then we start the building bridges thing in the Áras, and he goes to the north and he goes into Loyalist places where the police will not accompany him. So he's on his own, and he builds a relationship with them because he knows them. And they can't plamass and they can't do the happy clappy. He knows. And there's a great then mutual respect is built up, and a dialogue happens between people who, are, whom life has put up right against each other, with an honesty that often you don't find if somebody sends a civil servant up to talk to them or a diplomat to talk to them. This guy, Martin's mommy, but they were put out of their house like we were. We were machine gunned out of our house. But the Loyalists come into his house.
Which I want to come back to.
Yeah, but they come into his house. Yeah. The first thing they did was take the Sacred Heart picture off the wall. Yeah. This is a picture of Jesus Christ that I presume the whole lot of them grew up with in their house. They didn't grow up with Sacred Heart pictures, because nobody is as Sacred Heart picture-y as Catholics.
Protestants are also Christians,
so
apparently.
They came in, they took it off the wall, and they stamped on it. Now, for Martin's mommy, God rest her, like, that just went to her soul. Quiet country woman, who just found that really. These were neighbours. Like, they weren't strangers. These were same with us. The people who put us out of our home, they were neighbours.
Which is kind of the point, right? In my head, like, 'cause I've listened to like, there's a couple of people in the audience who know what I'm talking about here. When the audiobook of your memoir, right? Yeah. Now, it's not the only source of info, but I've listened to it 5 times, and each time I listen back to it, I've had to upgrade my Spotify subscription, by the way. Just anyway, not that matters, but just to like have the hours to like actually soak it in. Each time I listen to it, I learn something more, and that's part of it. So your upbringings collectively, individually, and both, on both parts, were incredibly challenging, enriching, because the kids don't really care. It's the parents that get indoctrinated eventually into some, lane or of some description. But how did you manage that? It seems like, I think as Southerners, I think I'd be naive if I neglected to mention that we just don't know. We don't invest enough to understand the nuance.
Well, I think as
and it's
young
adolescents,
adolescents,
other than, it's tricky.
As reasonably intelligent young adolescents, challenged by what's going on around you, the question that you're always formulating in your mind is, how do I react to this? Because there are options, and the options are really quite dramatic in that scenario. One of the options, of course, is to join the paramilitaries, as some of my friends and some of Martin's did. Both sets of paramilitaries, as it happens. So those are options. Or you can adapt by just parking it all and living your life as if it's not happening around you.
How do you do that when you're actually targeted personally?
This is the point. I mean, my brother John that you mentioned, they tried to kill John.
Savage attack.
Again, neighbours' children. loyalist neighbours' children, and thank God he survived. But again, he's, coming
He's
up on
why I got
70
to you.
now.
John is why I got to her, by the way.
My brother
Just
who's
John.
deaf.
Yeah, he's deaf.
And
I back-channeled through the deaf community. I
Yeah.
have no shame in admitting
Well,
to that. But it was
But
a way to get to
he
you.
wasn't he low-hanging fruit? A young deaf fellow of 17, easy target, and well known to the boys who did, who tried to kill him.
Shameful.
Unfortunately, we were not. John recognised them. We knew who they were, and unfortunately, we were never able. Even though this is the days
Initially.
of the RUC, we had a fantastic young police officer who was so good to John, who believed him absolutely. There was the medical evidence. His life was saved really because we lived so close to the Mater Hospital. Simple as that. I'll just tell you a very brief story about how that night, my mum and I were at home. My dad was over in the pub. Our windows were blocked with big wooden screens because we were expecting fire bombs, and so with the windows all blocked. But there was still in St. Gabriel's School, a block away from us, which no longer exists, because if you walk up the Shankill or up the Crumlin Road now, there is not one single second-level school. You go up the falls, there are 7 of them. That'll tell its own story. And anyway, St. Gabriel's had a youth club, which was just kind of still operational. And sometimes when the kids were coming down past our house, they would yahoo. John was out that night at a deaf club event in town. And coming back on the bus, these lads spotted him on the bus, and when he got off the bus, then they broke a bottle over his head, slashed.
When you say spotted him,
Well, they stalked him really, and they knew
for
him.
being Catholic.
Yeah, and they knew him though, because they said these were neighbours' children,
Yeah.
and they slashed an artery and left him for dead on the road. Now, my mum and I were sitting in the house, and we heard the noise, and at first we thought it was the kids from the youth club yahooing, and then just something about the timbre of the voice. I'd never heard my brother John scream. His speech is, anybody who's lived with someone who's profoundly deaf from birth, who has acquired speech, will know speech is different from those of us who are privileged to have been born, with hearing. And in just one of those moments when every part of your body, just implodes, I realized, Jesus Christ, that's John. That is John screaming. And I ran to the front door just in time to see a very elderly man, very, very elderly, local Protestant neighbour, holding John. The man is crying, John is screaming, and anyway, we got him to the hospital. He survived. Now, and it's a wonderful thing that he survived, but he's 70 years old.
Yeah.
He did not survive intact. Emotionally, psychologically, any more than any of us did, but particularly him. At 17,
physically.
he felt obliged to go to England to get the hell out of there. So everything gets interrupted. The things that should happen organically didn't happen. The life that you should have organically gets not just interrupted. It's because it's actually fractured. And you feel like you can't control things. People came to our door. This is where you were asking, how do you react? Loads of people came to our door, including most of the deaf community, it has to be said, locally, saying, who are these guys? Tell us, we'll get them.
Yeah.
And my father saying emphatically,
No.
No. This is not how we handle things in our family. No. And to hear from your parents what their principles are, what their values are, when they're tested so dramatically, is actually very important. To know that your parents,
your mum and dad were
both of them, absolutely, under no circumstances would they have encouraged anybody to retaliate. Actually, I'm the one, I wrote to the newspaper at the time I wanted corporal punishment brought back.
Defected.
And me who now is so phenomenally anti-corporal punishment, because also I see the damage that it has caused institutionally. But anger is a very dangerous emotion. It's a roller coaster. And I also know how many young people of our generation were angered enough by the horrible things that went on around them to make choices that they could not extricate themselves from. You join a paramilitary organization, you try extricating yourself from it when you get sense.
As well.
Completely different. I was going to mention Martin's mommy. Martin's mommy died very young, and she died of cancer. And if anybody tells me that cancer can't be stress-induced, I say, well, excuse me, we watched as it happened, as that lovely young woman never saw any of her grandchildren. And we never had the joy of her as a granny, never, because all that stress, she was a woman, gentle country woman who just was lovely, you know, a lovely person, and who believed that people could be lovely. And then they weren't, and it was neighbours. And we had the same experience. So Martin and I, when we met, I did not meet him on the football pitch. Needless to say, not having a heroic.
Apparently, he's a great footballer.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we keep saying. So he keeps saying. And I've bought the narrative, you know. But we met through the debates. We were both members of debating clubs in our schools, our respective schools. He was in a Christian Brothers, you know, all-boys school. I was in a Dominican convent, all-girls school. Our two sets of, you know, governing agencies in the schools had a principle, which was they were going to try and keep males and females apart until they were, you know, post-menopausal, and if they possibly could.
Which was incongruent with Catholicism.
You've no idea. It was ridiculous. So really, the only forum in which we met was in the debating society. In the debating society, you know, you met people of the opposite sex, and that's where I met Martin. Actually in the study hall of my old school, St. Dominic's, where we were engaged in a debating competition, which I won, incidentally. And just saying.
Just so you know.
Just saying.
Yeah.
And he was a fine debater, just not as good as me.
Not as good.
So anyway, so that's how we met. But it's also how as we became kind of coursed that we went then into university together, we became boyfriend and girlfriend over that summer before we went to university. And we both were, the troubles were now really hitting hard. This was 1969, you know,
I have some figures here.
You have all of that.
Do you mind me saying those?
Yeah.
Like, so 1960, you'll
69.
know what I'm talking about. 16, 1970, 20, 1971, 171. 1972, 480.
You can see the trajectory of deaths is growing.
Yeah.
So we're asking ourselves this question, you know, how do we respond to this? And we both kind of discovered, I grew up in a house, my father left school at 14, but up in Croghan, he got one hell of a good education because he introduced me, for example, as a child. He was a great man for books. The house was coming down with books. And encouraged us to read, which was great. Wonderful interest in Irish history, local history. And he only had the one day off in the week, but we were dragged to every museum and every blessed piece of stone that was fallen off another piece of stone that had a history. We were dragged, we were told them all, which was brilliant. But one of the great delights of my life that he introduced me to, and Martin and I discovered we had in common, was a love of Daniel O'Connell. The liberator whose statue stands in O'Connell Street, who was in France when the revolution broke out and said to himself, this is stupid. This is going to leave a legacy of disaster. Better dialogue. Like, a lot of wrong things going on here, don't get me wrong. A lot of bad stuff happening here. A lot of real justifiable, righteous anger and indignation, but my God, once the genie of violence is out of the bottle, you find it very hard to pull it all back.
How do you stay loyal to that? Like, I know that about you.
You know,
Like, you know, the John Hume
you
kind of mold.
To. And that's the other thing.
The Daniel O'Connell.
Yeah.
But
he was, you mentioned John Hume.
Yeah.
See, we were lucky. We were very lucky that we had what I would call the great inheritor of the baton of Dan O'Connell. The man who believed, yes, there are things that are wrong. Yes, you have righteous indignation, but in God's name, argue it out, stand your ground, believe in dialogue, push for democracy, push for peace through dialogue. Do not take a gun. Do not believe in the power of violence.
Walk us through that, if you can.
Yeah,
'Cause
well,
I'm stunned at the
you have
ability.
to. If you
to
want
do
a
that.
life, if
Yeah.
you want a life that has a future, and I always regard myself as very lucky. I met John Hume for the first time when I was 13 years of age. In 13, imagine, and he was then pushing the credit union. I never heard of the credit union. I lived in Ardoyne, like I mentioned, 70% unemployment, shocking poverty in the place. Very, very poor place at the time. And I'm 13 years of age, and my granny, who lived in Ardoyne, said to me, we'll go up to the parish hall. There's a meeting on tonight that I want to go to. Will you come up with me? I went up with her. And that was the night that John Hume introduced an audience of complete, disbelievers in the idea that your halfpenny, if you put it with the fella beside you, halfpenny, that becomes a penny. The guy beside you there, now you've got 2 pence, now you've got 3 pence. That collective money will create a power. And that power will give you agency in your life. I swear to God, it was like the Sermon on the Mount for me. It was like, being there for the loaves and fishes. It was actually one of those moments when you realized that your whole thinking was in a bunker, and you needed to, just take down the walls of that bunker and see another landscape. I was electrified by John Hume, and he was a powerful speaker. And I joined the credit union shortly after Ardoyne. We formed a credit union. I spent more nights in a dreary hall in the freezing cold with a coat on, counting those halfpennies and pennies, and knowing they were the future. I think one of the proudest moments for Martin and I, all our kids were in the credit union they were knee-high, and our daughter won an art competition. Now, my kids are not creative at all, may I say. But anyway, I think the bar was quite low. But she won a competition for, what does the credit union mean to you? And she drew a washing machine, because she remembered me and actually her granny going and borrowing the money from credit union when the washing machine gave up the ghost to get a new washing machine. And the little cartoons that she drew were of all those moments, the school uniform moment, that she'd heard my mommy talking about too. My mommy was a big, big believer in the credit union. And so it was the reality of that. And I was glad that my kids had picked up on that they knew that there were people, because they grew up in a house where we didn't really have those struggles. When they're two professional people, there's money coming in. So we didn't have the money struggles that my mom had, and her sisters had, with 12 children, one of them, another one with 10 kids. But she had picked up on that, thankfully, and that we had given her, I think, a decent education in life's realities. So anyway, to go back to Daniel O'Connell and John Hume, they were the rocks, but they were also the engines of our thinking. Yeah. When we got married, almost 50 years ago, Martin was working for Aer Lingus at the time, and he was an accountant.
CEO, didn't he?
He said, "Don't even start me." Because I married a guy who was a physicist who became an accountant, who then became a dentist. This is Irish divorce, You don't change the man. The man just changes who he is. And now he's got a new knee.
And isn't he great? He's great. So everybody
completely
applaud
new person.
Martin. He's great.
Yeah, but we discovered we had this mutual admiration for Dan O'Connell. And like Dan O'Connell and John Hume put inspiration and ideas and hope in our spines. And when we got married, because he worked for Aer Lingus, travel, we could have travelled anywhere that Aer Lingus went. We could have gone on a really fancy, nice honeymoon. Anyway, we didn't. We went to Kerry in March, flip's sake, and we stayed in a hotel opposite, wait for it, a graveyard, and the clouds never lifted. We never saw the lakes of Killarney. The clouds never lifted. But why did we go there? On our first day, we went to Derrynane. We went to the home of Dan O'Connell. And we had written ahead to whoever was looking after that house. As it turned out, it was a great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Dan O'Connell's, who wrote back to me before I got married, saying, "Oh, please do come, you'll be very welcome." And I just wrote and said, "Look, we're two young people getting married, and we're and we're from Belfast, and we're dedicating our life to his values and his principles. And we'd love to see the house." And we didn't know was it open or closed or what. anyway, we went. And what was really fascinating, God, we got such a welcome, and we got tea in china cups and everything. It was wonderful, but we were the only ones there. And the buses full of visitors, particularly American visitors, the tour buses, were passing visibly at the top of the road. You could see them flying past, heading to the next place where they'd spent money, the shops or the hotels. And I thought, they're missing. They're missing who we are as a people. Dan O'Connell is not called the liberator for nothing, because he didn't just liberate Catholics from Catholic emancipation.
Exactly.
It was Presbyterians, it was Russian Jews, it was African slaves. I mean, the great liberator of African American slaves, Frederick Douglass, caught his inspiration from Daniel O'Connell. Yeah. This man spread hope and democratic human rights as a thinking process right across the world.
And it doesn't surprise me that you're loyal to him, because that ideology, that approach, it obviously.
Well,
look,
250 years ago was his birth. And where were we on that day? We were in Cahir Saiveen at the Mass to commemorate him with his bad knee. We were there to commemorate that man, because, to be honest, he shaped the course of our lives. Had we...
Did you get that from your parents? Did you get that from your parents?
Yeah, well, my parents were... where did I learn the name Daniel O'Connell? It was in my own house.
Yeah.
It was in my own house. I didn't learn it in school, that's for sure. Even going to to Catholic schools,
all
there was
learn it in
Irish
your house,
history was a
his
far-out irrelevance.
But your parents, they would have spoken about it openly, like that.
Oh,
was their...
yeah, absolutely. And books in the house on O'Connell, books, the speeches from the dock, the Robert Emmets, all of that.
Yeah.
I grew up with all of that. So you knew it wasn't that we were held away from what I might call the non-constitutional path to solving problems, but rather we were introduced to both, but told that the supremely human and decent one was the path of peace and the path of forgiveness and the path of tolerance and good neighbourliness. So here I am, we both grew up in Protestant neighbourhoods. At one point that might have seemed like a disaster. Actually, it wasn't, because the friends of our childhood, particularly the friends of my childhood, not so much Martin's, but the friends of my childhood became the people, whenever I was elected, said, tell us what we need to do.
Yeah.
And they were they were the people who wanted to help to build the bridges. One of my great neighbours, another of my sisters, was bridesmaid to one of our neighbours, a girl called Florence Maxwell. The Maxwells were local Protestant family, fantastic friends of ours, and Florence married a Scottish soldier. Now.
A mixed marriage, as they say.
Well, and she married him in Thiepval Barracks in Belfast, in 1970, 71. For a Catholic family to go to the wedding of a Scottish soldier in Thiepval Barracks, if you lived in Ardoyne, you were courting disaster. You were looking to be tarred and feathered, but we all went. And my sister was the bridesmaid. And I remember the wonderful minister, a fantastic guy called Sidney Callaghan. He was one of the most early ecumenists. So many things changed for the worse, but he was a minister in the Shankill Road in her parish church that she didn't darken too often. She was far more often in our church on a Saturday afternoon waiting for us to come out of confession. And she was the one who figured out from first principles that one of our priests gave children Cadbury's roses, and we immediately pivoted to that confession box. And she just observed this. Why are you going there? These guys are coming out with the sweets. You're not getting anything except 10 Hail Marys. Why? But anyway, Florence, an very interesting case in point, because we went to that, and at that, this is how different times were. All through the 60s, as we were growing up, I would go down the Shankill Road with her. Shopping was the Shankill Road. We'd go down there, and the great shops in the Shankill, and great old crack and banter. And we always called into Sydney's church, always. And he loved to see us and chat to us. But on the day of her wedding, when he looked down at the congregation in Thiepval Barracks, he said, just want to make the point that the face, apart from the bride and her family, the face I know best, and he said, was mine. And that was how, we were, the Second Vatican Council, ecumenism, we'd had visits from the Republic to the north, the Terence O'Neill thing and the Lamass thing. There was a moment of, I would call it a golden moment. And somehow, and it all fell apart, of course, with Paisleyism.
We'll talk later about Paisley.
And the stirring up of history. There's a man who changed his mind eventually, thankfully.
He did.
But at the time, he was toxic, and stirred up a lot of bad stuff. And it's not much as me says that. The guys who got involved in loyalist paramilitarism, would say that they were inspired by him. Yeah. And as a result of that inspiration, they did horrible things.
And anger was the
and
platform.
And they went out feeling that they had a righteous indignation. And of course, pivoting back again to the default position always of war, not peace. Because if we look at the history of our world, I'm born up just in a few years after the Second World War. 70 million people died in that blessed war. Europe was just a bloodbath. Before that, you had the Great War that was supposed to end all wars, but actually caused the Second World War. And if you go back to the century before that, war after war after war. So we are really a generation that was given options because we had people who just looked at that bloodbath, great thinkers who gave us the European Union. They, as the antidote to war, when people who hated each other and killed each other and murdered each other would now work through partnership for peace. It gave us the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the first time in human history. Yeah. Ignore the Magna Carta. We're always told the Magna Carta was for an elite. It wasn't for the likes of me and you. It was for an elite. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that was for us. That was for everybody. Every human being, by virtue of being human, had these rights. Nobody could take them away, but everybody tried. Governments tried, institutions tried, religions tried. But you were entitled to them as of right. But that was only in the late 1940s. So this is a movement of people horrified by our human capacity for war and for letting it happen and participating and collaborating in it, and then lionizing it. And now we have another way. And we, in a sense, at least I anyway, and Martin, we're the first generation who had the option against war, of building institutions that would prevent war. Now there's a hell of a lot of backsliding going on now. We can see that, anti-democratic backsliding, pro-war backsliding, all of that. But we are the generation who was given the opportunity to build a completely new way of engaging with each other in this world and being people who respected the dignity of every other person. Because if I want my dignity respected, I have to offer it to you. I can't say, well, I'm entitled to it more than you are. The whole principle evaporates.
Listen, everyone in the room knows she is actually entitled to it more than we are.
No.
If we're being fair. I hear you though.
I was reared to what I put down now, and my simple principles are respect for every human person and respect for the earth. If we can embed that in human hearts all over the world, we will actually have managed to change and to pivot away from the badness that is in us, that always conduces to bad things.
I've been raised in an incredibly Catholic environment, gospel, Bible, it's very, very intense, for better, for worse. But I see others practice in a different way or operationalize it, if I can intellectualize a little bit, in a slightly different way. I see you acting it out without preaching it.
Yeah, well, I think
which I think is the key.
Preaching was the easy part.
Well, it is, isn't it?
The rules, because rules, when people preach, essentially, from a rules base, you're talking about control.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the Catholic Church, not by choice.
But the basis of your whole theme and campaign was all love the other.
This is the other big change that's happening in the world around us now, and I think it's worth thinking on. I was baptized at the age of 2 weeks. Just may start the story the other way around.
Here we go.
Just hold that thought. Baptized at 2 weeks, right? Which is the case for most people in Christian churches in Ireland. We're baptized as babies, right?
Early.
And in that moment of baptism, that's when you become a Catholic, right? But did any of you see the film Mary, Queen of Scots with Saoirse
Ronan.
Start again.
Yeah.
Saoirse Ronan in it, in the title role. Anybody see it? Yeah. Anyway, Martin and I went to see it in the Lighthouse in Dublin with all our kids. You know, there we are, stretched out in the second row, the whole lot. And bear in mind that there were about 2 years making this film, and it's based on really good academic books, of which there are quite a number on Mary, Queen of Scots. And the opening of the film starts with a piece of script, if any of you might remember. First line: Mary, Queen of Scots, was born a Catholic. I nearly imploded. And I start, that's actually theologically, absolutely, factually incorrect. No, that did not happen. And I'm expostulating. I'm saying, this is ridiculous, you know, after all the books that they use. I mean, how can they possibly be this stupid? And then my son from the far end says, Mum, shut up. We're all theologically literate in this row. Do you think you could leave the discussion to the end? But the point being, there is this notion that you're born, that faith is something you are born into. Now, I know that Islam teaches that we're all born Muslim. And the Catholic Church and the Christian churches generally have kind of, on the one hand, said, well, baptism is actually how you become a Catholic. But on the other hand, they haven't been behind the door and suggesting to us that we didn't have any choice in the matter. So I'm born, and at 2 weeks, you know, in my little white outfit that my mother has made, I'm wheeled down into Ardoyne Chapel, I'm baptized. And here's the thing: I'm now a Catholic for life, according to church teaching.
You can't leave, as Sarah.
Yeah, well, no, there's no way, there's no mechanism for leaving.
Yeah.
And what is more, there's no mechanism ever for saying, actually, I accept all this stuff. There isn't. There's no exit strategy. And what is worse, exiting is in attempting to exit.
Yeah.
You know, if you become somebody who's an apostate, you're now actually committing a canonical offense within church teaching. So, and it's a very tightly, and I'm saying this not against the Catholic Church, because other churches do this, other denominations do this too. This happens to be the one that I know best and research best. So it's why I made myself a canon lawyer, to see what the heck happened here.
Did you do a PhD abroad?
Pardon?
Just in canon law? You did a PhD just
I did a PhD
after
in canon
your
law, yeah.
2 years, 2 term.
And actually it's the best thing I ever did, you know, because it allowed me to just take a scalpel to probe the kind of the bits that adhere to my life that I didn't really have time before to put together, but took the time after I left office to put together. But the problem with that is that's the teaching, and it still is the teaching of the church now. That comes out of an imperial way of dealing with people. The church says, now you're a Catholic, and you see all the things, there's the faith in God and the lovely commandment to love one another. I love all that. Love the nativity stuff. Love the loaves and fishes. Love all that. See the rest of it? That you must obey the magisterium. That is a collection of bishops, celibates, who have decided what you will believe. Yeah. For example, that women can't be priests. Right, no. Or that, not believing that. Or that people who are gay are intrinsically disordered, not having that either. And
hold on, I think some people might appreciate the background and your intervention and like collective intervention in the campaign itself.
Yeah.
But like there is a personal resonance to that, because I know your son Justin, who's
son
a
Justin
remarkable individual.
Yeah.
But not to highlight him.
Anyway, a lot of
and your brother John, you know, like, but there's a bit more resonance to it.
Well, I mean, look, before Justin was even thought of, like even before you know, long before Justin was born in 1985, and but in 1975 I was a co-founder with David Norris and a couple of other people around the kitchen table of the Campaign for Homosexual Law Reform, because our laws at that time criminalised homosexual sexual behaviour.
I learned last night until 93. Am I right in saying
that?
Yeah,
we had to go to the European Court of Justice. Yeah. Thank God for Mary Robinson, who took on that case pro bono at the time, along with a number of other really great lawyers, because we lost in our own Supreme Court, just indeed as Catherine Zappone and her wife, or late wife, lost when they went to have their marriage, that I think was in Canada, wasn't it? They were married in Canada. Yeah. They wanted their marriage recognised, and they were told by our Supreme Court no. And so that we had to have the referendum, and which of course was a great day out, wonderful, and a great outcome. And I hope that many gay people realise that they had the power and the the support of Irish people, but as I said to my son, it's never a straight line. There are no straight lines in life.
No
It's
pun
a great
intended,
win,
yeah.
and it tells you something, and it allows you to really have hope. But, just don't forget, people wait for you in the long grass.
Yeah.
And they regroup. And the next thing, you know, progress gets interrupted, as we see. And so you have to keep pushing. And you have to keep the faith with what you believe, the ethic and principle. Anyway, go back to the magisterium. So you're told...
Hold on.
Yeah,
We could go, look,
Martin told
do
you,
you see that?
he warned you.
Time's up. If we
Yeah.
have a
Time's up,
flashing thing,
right.
time's up.
I
Now,
can't believe it, time's
time
up.
is not up. I've texted somebody just
Yeah.
to say, like, come on, cop on. We have more time. But I also want to include a Q&A kind of segment.
Oh, sure, please, by all
Now,
means. Yeah.
we have only just gotten started, I know that.
Yeah.
But I do want to just, like, you know, even skim over
Yeah.
some things, as superficial as that might feel. I think you were one of 3 female barristers joining the bar in Belfast
Yeah.
before there were ever female barristers.
Well, there had been, there were female barristers before us, but they'd all just given up. They were a
Okay.
tiny number. They'd just given
Yeah.
up. The whole thing was just so misogynistic and
accommodating,
dreadful.
yeah.
But we were the first 3 to have a go at it.
But your first case
Yeah.
is fascinating to
Yeah.
me. You were like peripheral to it, but it was, you had been run out of the Ardoyne, not
Yeah.
the Ardoyne. You were put up in a Catholic kind of area in a house that was probably used by the paramilitaries.
Was used by paramilitaries,
actually,
by the IRA. But
I was
that's
trying
the
to
truth
say
in it.
allegedly, but anyway.
As
listen,
an arms dump.
Before the listeners get onto us. But, and your first case.
My first case.
Pertained to that.
Yeah, unreal. I mean, you just wonder sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidence anyway anymore.
Yeah.
But
You would see this as a faith-based.
it's just these are all lessons in life,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm quite happy to say. I mean, I have my difficulties with the church that I was baptized into,
Haven't
and
heard
that
that before.
conscripted me into this relationship with the magisterium. That I'm quite happy to say now. Sorry, lads.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you see
yeah.
what you told me? I just don't accept that anymore. Anyway, so I have, I'm the child of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights: freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, freedom of religion,
Yeah.
and freedom to change religion. So whatever canon law says, it better get around to acknowledging that, and it hasn't done yet.
Yeah.
So, but to just take your point about that day, first day going in through the door, the spinning door at the front of the courts in Belfast, I was stopped by a very eminent barrister who said to me, "I'm looking for you." He said, "You're in the Crumlin Road with me." And I thought, oh my God, my first day I've got actual work, because I knew that I was looking at a long, undistinguished career as an impecunious barrister. But anyway, this wonderful man, Sir Anthony Campbell, brought me up the Crumlin Road. He said, "Don't worry, you don't have to say anything, just sit beside me and hand me the papers." And then he handed me the papers. He said, "Read those." Yeah. Anyway, it was a criminal injuries compensation claim by the wife of a soldier who had been blown up in a barracks, but he was holding at the tail fin of a rocket launcher. And they weren't supposed to have their photographs taken with it, but they couldn't resist the temptation. They had found it in a derelict house, in an old air raid shelter, and they had their photographs taken, and this poor girl,
where was that
expecting
derelict
twins,
house?
blew up, and they were killed. So this was a case being taken, and I'm reading this in the car and realizing the derelict house is where I was living. It was my home.
Yeah.
And we had just moved into it when we lost our home, and we'd been couch surfing until these nuns lent us a derelict house that was due for demolition. 19 windows out of it the day we moved in, and half burnt, because the IRA, of course, were trying to keep us out of it because they used it as an arms dump. There was an old air raid shelter under it, and that's where they left the rocket launcher, the tail fin of a rocket launcher. And that's where and so I'm reading this in the car and realizing, sweet Jesus, the day they got that, that's when we moved into the house. It could have been my brothers and sisters. You can imagine a bunch of wee ones finding a piece of metal, finding an air raid shelter in a house, for God's sake. And anyway, that was, so I just was dumbstruck.
That was your first day?
That was my first day.
As a professional?
Yeah.
Now, your first day, your first case?
Yeah, and my second one, incidentally, was to defend a man who had tried to put a Catholic family out of their home. Unfortunately, they chose the wrong family. The family that was headed by a police officer who became subsequently a very big wig in the RUC, and he produced his pistol and frightened the melt out of the whole lot of them. They ran off. This loyalist mob who'd come to put the Catholics out, but he got them prosecuted, and I was given the job then of defending him, and the last time I saw him, he was in the end of a brick coming through my window at my parents' home. And during my cross-examination in front of Charlie Stewart, RM, my very first case, the police officer, I had to put it to him that his eyewitness identification of this man, might have been, it was in the dark and maybe he was mistaken. And he just said back to me, "Mary, you know him as well as I do." So, yes. Yeah. What was worse, the Belfast Telegraph covered the case, and it was on the front blessed pages. And when I rang home that evening, my mommy said to me, "You needn't come home. She said, your dad is apoplectic. Is this what we educated you for?" So there you go.
Tricky.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Such is the drama of life.
I can't relate to that whatsoever. No, but in fascinating kind of connections ultimately at the same time. I am so incredibly conscious of time. There are so many other talking points that I actually planned and wanted to get to and hoped to, but I'm not sure.
You're well over time now.
Yeah, I know.
You're eating into dinner time now, I think.
There's a red dot about to appear somewhere on the torso, and I know who it is. I'll just mention.
Did you want somebody to ask a question?
You've had a fascinating life. No, I think I want to bring these guys in. And there's a few folks from, north and south of the border.
Yeah,
who,
sure. There's
who
a hand going up here at the front now for the last 10 minutes. You're so patient. Have you something you wanted to ask?
I'll come back to the applause and accolades.
Could we?
Yeah. So maybe Q&A is where we will head to. I know there's going to be competition. Elaine, do I see you? Yes.
Thank you. I've a comment and a question, if I may. Dr. McAleese, you credit us with knowing how to work with trauma or knowing trauma. I think our failing, and I'm addressing this as much to our peers here, my peers, our failing is that we often do not put that trauma in the context of political, cultural, historical context, and I think we're still, even though we're aware of it more, I think we're still challenged to know what that looks like in the room, talking to somebody, how to engage with those narratives that are so that continue to affect people's lives. My question to you, however, is you speak about the shock and the sadness when inevitably the Pandora's box opens once again, and that people who've lived together or alongside go to war with each other, and you realize that you don't understand each other's historical, political backgrounds and thinking, and I'm wondering, can you speak to the healing, or what you think in peace times, or when there is a fragile peace, what does allow for the healing, and what does progress things so that the Pandora's box won't open, and there won't be such an explosion.
Actually, you ask a very important question, because sometimes people think that all you have to do, that dialogue solves everything. Put them around a table, create a process for dialogue, and that will solve the problem. Our own experience is that is not the case. Dialogue very often, even between, let's say, in a war situation or in a conflict situation, in a family situation, to put people in the same room together very often is to risk breakdown, because things are so fragile, so raw. The preparation for dialogue really has to go back to take account of that context. For some reason that I'll never understand, I kind of knew that from way back. And back in the day, one of the things I did, long before the Good Friday Agreement, was to make a series of broadcasts for BBC in Northern Ireland called The Protestant Mind. Because we'd had many attempts at reconciliation, or the Sunningdale Agreement, the Anglo-Irish Agreement, when every Pollyanna in the country thought we have it cracked. It's done now. And we can see it also happening, for example, with Gaza. It's done. We've got it. The deal is done, but it's never done, because the embeddedness of it has It's not there because we haven't done enough of the backstory. We haven't got enough of the backstory and the infill to secure a really meaningful kind of end of conflict discussion. So I did a series of broadcasts called The Protestant Mind, looking at what it is that shapes a Protestant mind in a way that, and also the way over and against the Catholic mind. In the Protestant mind, just to give a very simple example, you talked about the Bible. We were actually not reared with the Bible in Catholic teaching. They kept us away from it, quite frankly, and didn't think we could be trusted with it. But in the Protestant mind, the Bible, the word means everything, and the word has a meaning. In Catholic teaching, it didn't. In Catholic teaching, you could take a word and you could elasticate it this way and pull it that way. But for Protestants, that was Jesuitical. That was to be fraudulent. And so you can see, if you put those two in the same room, in negotiations, for example, and I taught negotiations for years, you go into a room with someone who thinks that the word means everything, they will enter a negotiation with no bottom line. They'll come in with a plan A, no plan B, and it's either plan A or nothing. And if they don't get plan A, they walk away. Whereas other people have the plan B, plan C, plan D, and now you have, but that's a recipe for breakdown unless they intuit that and know that and prepare it. And that was my experience. And some people have very graciously said that when it came to the Good Friday Agreement, that understanding was very important because it meant you didn't stick them in a room and hope that they'd agree. You worked, you tried to find the fragments in each of them that were never being disclosed openly to the other. Where was there the fragment, for example, that would lead to compromise, but nobody would ever admit to it? And that's what George Mitchell did, for example. He worked those rooms, the independent little, the independent little republics of thinking, until he was able to extract from them enough of a feeling that, my God, there is actually in back of it, there might be the makings of a plan B. There might be the makings of a compromise. Because in a conflict situation, very few will admit up front, because they lose their constituency, if they show the weakness of compromise. And yet we all know that to end conflict, compromise is absolutely essential.
As I segue to a sign language question or observation, what are your thoughts on Paisley?
On Paisley? Oh, well, I mean, I already gave that indication. I mean, he was an absolutely toxic leader, largely responsible, regrettably, for stirring up the mess that became the Troubles and inciting. Now, paramilitarism had never gone away in Northern Ireland of my childhood. It was still a culture. So he just stoked up flames that, ashes that had been, were left to die and were actually, were unhealthy, but they were still there. And he stoked that up. Then, of course, he got the opposite and equal reaction. And the flames then the ashes fanned to a flame again. But I have to say that he also then became, we know that the Good Friday Agreement did not involve him. He stayed outside of it for 7 years.
That's right.
And eventually came in when the realization dawned that if he did come in...
Narcissism.
Well, to quote Seamus Heaney, narcissism has its rewards.
Absolutely.
And when he began to realize that in this moment he could possibly become the First Minister, which in the past would always have eluded him, now you could work with the narcissistic personality and deliver the change that was going to be good for people. I mean, I could live with him being First Minister because I could see, oh my God, this is good for Northern Ireland. This is good for all of it. This is great. I mean, I remember meeting him for the first time. He came and when he had breakfast with us in the Áras, and he was, Mr. Pleasant. And I did a speech with him actually quite a few years ago on St. Columbanus. This month, a few years ago. This is the month of St. Columbanus, the man who gave us the European Union. Just took us 1,500 years to cop on to his good idea. And but we went to this St. Columbanus event. And St. Columbanus was, he was pretty hard on popes, to be honest. But he was, pre-Catholic, obviously, and pre-Protestant 1,500 years ago. And so we all kind of owned a bit of him. But I was talking at an event with Paisley, and I was very careful to leave the word pope out of my speech, thinking that it might actually, stir up, the anyway, stir up the anti-Catholic thing in Paisley. So I very carefully constructed the speech that it left out popes. He didn't. He had popes everywhere in the speech. Benignly. So nicely and benignly that I thought, well, now that's a lesson for me now. And because he just was completely uninhibitedly responded to the wonder of Columbanus and the joy of Columbanus and the fact that we shared Columbanus' story. So, and yet he ends up being anti-European. I'm pro-European because Columbanus was, of course, the inspiration for the European Union, a thing that we very rarely acknowledge. We're awfully good at not acknowledging the things that we actually were good at.
We are.
But anyway, Paisley, for me, one of the most wonderful cameos was driving with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and the then King and Queen of the Belgians in a car together, and I was sitting beside Queen Elizabeth, and
Is that the career highlight, or is there?
No, this was just
it's
the
up
you
there.
mentioned Paisley. This involves
In
Paisley,
amongst it.
and we're sitting knee to knee, and she had a terrible time with Paisley. He called her everything under the sun.
This is Queen Elizabeth
terrible.
now.
And every time she went and she visited every pope from John the 23rd onwards, and he was very cruel. He used terrible language about her. But anyway, at this stage, we were talking about the fact that with the St Andrews Agreement and Paisley, no, beg your pardon, we hadn't. 1998, we didn't. We were 7 years away from the Good Friday Agreement, and we were from the St Andrews Agreement. Paisleyites were still out, and we were talking about the wonder of getting the marvelous miracle of getting the Good Friday Agreement, but without Paisley. And so we're talking about him. And Queen Paola said to us, "This man Paisley, who is he? I've never heard of him." And Queen Elizabeth, who was very funny, she looked at me and she laughed and she said to Paola, "Lucky you." That was brilliant. Brilliant.
And I am glad we touched on Queen Elizabeth, because I think that was a momentous occasion, and I don't know who else would have done it. I think you mentioned, allude to Tony Blair, implicitly maybe. But I wonder who actually could bring peace to Gaza, Middle East. I'm being suggestive here, provocatively, but I don't think we have the time to deliberate too much on that. I'm just going to say one last cheeky question, because I know I have a sign language question here from the floor. Unless I see a hand going up, go on. Now's your time. Sorry, Lisa. I know I'm in trouble.
You have to get the sign language question.
No, that's
promised.
That's happening. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was just a quick comment. Thanks, Dr. McAleese. I suppose in listening to your stories, there is that real sense of felt trauma. And for me, as a clinical psychologist, I'm always thinking about power. I'm thinking about role and responsibility. And it's a theme that came up through what you were speaking about, principles. And I see our role a lot of the time as psychologists is trying to support people along that journey from surviving to thriving, and thinking about the impact that the Troubles have had. Like, this is living history. This is people have lived and felt this. What do you think our roles or responsibilities are in the context of the profession that we're working in that you'd like to see more of from us? So what sort of things would you like to see us speaking to or incorporating in the therapy room to try and bridge that gap from surviving to thriving? Thank you.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm glad you exist as a profession, because for a long time, I think that profession was growing and inveigling itself into a space of comfort and of support for people, but accessing psychological services, as with psychiatric services, for a lot of people who are living with that sort of stoical thing of not talking, they didn't use the services, afraid to use it, afraid that it was maybe a sign of weakness, rather than a sign of strength. And I go back to the children who were abused, for example, who only in late adulthood realized that bits of their lives that were dysfunctional and damaging could be related directly back to those experiences. And how were they going to now extricate themselves and try and reconcile that? And it's really only with the help of psychological and psychiatric services that they did that. A very good example in my own family. My youngest brother, you can imagine, the baby of the family. Everybody loves the baby of the family, the most loved child in the house.
What's his name?
Clement.
Okay.
Delightful.
Sorry, I actually thought it
and
was
he is
Damien.
Clement and everything.
There is a Damien in your family as well, isn't there?
There is. He's a gorgeous person. But at the age of 11, my parents sent him to the wonderful, as they thought, great grammar school. They were so proud of him getting into the grammar school, passing that ridiculously evil exam, the 11 plus, horrible thing, that benefited Martin and I, but then didn't benefit like 75% of others. And I think that's a big problem for Northern Ireland. Imagine still 3 times more young people leave school with nothing in Northern Ireland than here or in England. I mean, it's ridiculous. It just breaks my heart. There's work for ye guys, for the future. You'll never be unemployed, God knows. But I looked at my brother. My brother Clem was in his 50s before he felt, thanks be to God, he married a Jewish girl whose people had the experience of the Holocaust that they kept inside. Her brother became a psychiatrist to try and deal with that. And then she could intuit that there was something deep lodged in him that he'd never disclosed. And that it was that he had been abused by Father Finnegan, the headmaster of this very, very well-known and grand Catholic boys' school in Newry. Father Finnegan was regarded as a great educator. He had, all these young Catholic men were going into the professions and strengthening the Catholic community. And for that, he had a veil of complete impunity. And my brother was 50 before he could disclose that. My mother was 90 before she had to confront that, by which time Father Finnegan, of course, had died a natural death. My mother said he was lucky because she'd have stabbed him to death with her knitting needles if she'd been given half the chance, as indeed many's a mother would. I mean, they reckon he had hundreds of victims. So we're a generation, and you are it, God knows, you're in the front line of this, who know all that trauma that was suffered in institutions, the Ryan Report. You know all the trauma that was suffered in the Dublin Archdiocese, the Murphy Report. You have a body of information now, it's actually scary, it's horrific, that opens up and unpacks lives that were held tight together by secrecy, not something that was healthy, something that was deeply unhealthy, and that was now impacting their lived lives with people they'd married, people they divorced, with the kids they had, with the relationship with alcohol, with it. You are the people who know these stories and have the what I might call you have the stuff with which to contextualize.
Yeah.
The person who comes in with the problem, the unhappy marriage. It's a bit like my brother and his wonderful, now ex-wife, but she's a great friend. She helped him. She helped him to heal. He couldn't tell his own brothers and sisters, and didn't. Didn't tell his own parents. Why? Oh my God, because they were going through the aftermath of all the losing the house, blah, 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 and he didn't want to tell anybody. Carrying a burden of guilt. What was it that provoked him? He wrote to the newspapers a few years back, this is what broke the whole thing, because a young man who had the courage to go public suddenly was being told by others, oh, you're only after the money. Dear sweet God, after having the courage, your family, your community, your neighbours are saying those mean things and they're defending that moron, that absolute pedophilic moron. And then when you unpack it, you discover actually a lot of people did know. And I look at that guy, Father Finnegan. Do you know who he particularly prayed? Because in those days, the school was also a boarding school. And he particularly prayed on 11-year-olds who were boarders, who cried at night for their mummies. Sweet, suffering God. What kind of evil? Yeah. What kind of evil was the experience of that whole bunch of children?
Disguised
now,
as
you go out into the world, and yes, you go to university, yes, you get a degree, yes, you're a professor, but you're carrying that in your heart and your soul, and it has shaped you as a person. And it has misshaped you as a person, and you need a lot of help, to strip that away and give you your pure self back, because you're entitled to that. But on your own, you might never do it. And we know now, for a lot of people, it never happened. They never got their true selves back. But thank God, you are the people who can help them. And not just them, but all the other people who cross your door with all sorts of wires that have gone haywire. And your job is to, thank God, and you're trained to do that. And you have, I think you have now the credibility that other generations would have denied you, because in the past, a lot of people, what are you going there for? What do you need a psychiatrist for? What do you need a psychologist for?
Yeah,
You know,
100%, yeah, 100%.
You're just a person who's looking for attention. You're an attention seeker.
Psychiatrists, like, you know, there's one in the front seat. Don't mind him. Yeah.
You had to get a mention.
He's part of the enemy. No. But you're resonating strongly with me.
Are we ever going to get that sign language question?
I am in trouble. I'm
Yeah, come
already
on.
in trouble. You don't.
Sign
but
language question.
like, it's not ending without the sign language question. Don't look at me like that, Lisa. So the sign language question. Now, I don't speak ISL fluently, but
But you'll tell us what it
I
is.
speak Donny. This is my brother who's actually signing the question. It's an observation with a question, I think. Go on. Yeah.
Question?
So he remembers you in your inauguration speech, 1997, as president. And you're the only president. There's lots of topics, and now I'm injecting a little bit of like topical. Do you speak Irish? You know, no one ever asks about sign language.
Yeah.
You're the only president. His observation is to actually say thank you in your inauguration
Speech.
So
Thank you.
you signed
Yeah.
to the nation,
That's
which
right.
wouldn't have always been picked up easily, you know. But
No,
he,
because
he
I
and
started
others
I started my speech then by saying, how good to see my.
Do you speak
deaf
BSL or
friends.
ISL? I know we'll continue
I
this conversation.
speak a mixture of
Yeah.
every kind of thing. Why? My brother went to school in Dublin.
Yeah,
Remember this, profoundly deaf from birth.
Joseph's.
No, not at all, not even. No, it was to Stillorgan, Mary
yeah.
Immaculate School for the Deaf,
Yeah.
where the teachers were poor.
Yeah.
And they had embraced a theory which was that
Lip
children who were deaf were not to be taught the sign language.
I remember that,
They were to be taught to speak. A lot of those kids came from all deaf households. How was that going to work then?
Yeah.
And those children, my brother boarded there from the age of 5, absolutely hated every living minute of it. And every time we left him back to the house, the school, there was a row, he actually kicked out. Do you remember in the days when there was a wee triangular window in cars? He kicked 2 of those out in bad temper. I didn't blame him. I didn't blame him. But they were smacked for being caught using sign language.
Yeah.
Imagine that. That's how much we've grown up,
So
thank
here's
God.
a little coincidence, which isn't
But
part
so
of the...
they developed their own. You remember in Beach Park?
Yeah.
Beach Park.
Yeah.
The reason why Beach Park is called Beach Park, that's the school he went to, was because the head mistress, the nun, had dimples.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. God
so
forbid.
they developed their own sign language.
So the PSI's founding member, now there's 3 in the mix, but like the predominant founding member worked with the language impaired and hearing impaired and deaf community back in the day, Karina Garvey, just a shout out to Karina, and she would have assessed Donny back in the day as well, and was a very constructive, positive, guiding kind of influence in our family history. But it's an interesting connection.
Yeah, it's only in recent times that ISL has been recognised.
I speak Donny, I don't speak ISL. That's all I know. It's a little dialect.
What electrified me about sign language, Tony will know this, my brother John had a massive stroke when he was in Berlin, and he was doing a program on sign language. And coming out of the program, he was in the Autobahn station when he had a massive stroke. By pure luck, there were 4 nuns observed what happened, and they realized that he wasn't just a druggie who had dropped, or an alcoholic, that he was a guy who just had a stroke. And they took him they got him taken to immediately to a neurological hospital. I spent the next 6 weeks in Berlin as he was in a coma, came out of the coma. And then the word went out through the deaf community, whom I did not know in Berlin, about this young man who was in the hospital on his own. They were remarkable. They used to come and visit him. They brought him a television, and I met them. What amazed me, many of them profoundly deaf from birth, fluent in English. Yeah. My brother never cracked the code of English because his education was so atrocious. Yeah. Deaf education in his day was awful. Just awful. He never cracked the code of English. And then it hit me, listening to these young people who were deaf from birth, talking to me and also interpreting for me to the doctors, the German doctors. I was amazed. I came back to Belfast I was then working in Queen's, Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Queen's, and we've got to do something. At that time in Ireland, this is the 1990s, never had there been a profoundly deaf child from birth in an Irish university. Not one.
Can I pick you up on that?
Not
'Cause,
one.
like, the final question of the session
Different now, thank God.
relates
Different
very
now.
much to what you're saying, though, which is almost poignant. It affects me as well. What have you gained, earned, as a consequence, in a constructive way, because of John?
Because of John, how the thing I've learned most, Donny, is how easy, even in a loving family, it is to be left out when you're deaf. And my brother, my biggest memory of my brother, as we are growing up, and we're a chatty, chatty, chatty family, 9 of us, is my brother grabbing my elbow and saying, "Remember me, I'm here." And he was taken off to boarding school at 5. So when he came, and it was term boarding, so we saw him at Easter and Christmas and summer. He comes back to people who are not used to having him in the playground, even in the house, to be honest. And that was, that was wrong. That was all wrong. And so, and of course, we as a family, we should have all embraced sign language from the day we discovered he was deaf. But we were told, oh no, he will learn to speak. Oh yeah, right. And so I've just learned. John taught me how easy it is to neglect, to really be very neglectful with the best will in the world of someone in your own family, and not to know what they are suffering, not to know their pain. And I have just a desperate sense of lostness, waste over that. To think in so many houses of children like John going back to their homes after having had a so-called education and being none the better for it and actually being the worse for it.
Yeah.
Imagine in those days smacking children who had no other language except sign language. Yeah. And the sign language they had wasn't formal, it wasn't ISL, it wasn't BSL, it wasn't international sign language, it wasn't someone that would take them to Berlin where they could engage. It was this makey-uppy sign language constructed away out of sight of the nuns and the teachers so you wouldn't be caught. I mean, really, honestly, I just look at that and think, what a waste.
I'm emotional because there's a bit of a connection between yourself, your upbringing, totally different and separate. I'm not even comparing. But there's a little bit of something and resonance within your upbringing, my own family upbringing, Karina Garvey, our founding member, primary founding member at least, and the connectivity between it all. And I'm just incredibly privileged to have had this experience with you. You don't realise it.
Oh, it's great fun. Thank you so much for listening. You're so good. So good. Thank you.
And
wow. Yeah. Now,
I know,
let them get their lunch.
there is a lunch, yeah. But before we get to lunch, I know I'm in trouble. I know I'm always in trouble. But
you're dead in big trouble now.
No, look, I'm used to it. But at the same time, I do think it's okay. I think Q&A is maybe ended, but I think it's really important to just mark how historic this has been, how privileged we are to have had you join us. I know on the socials we saw you there joining Catherine Connolly and Mary Robinson and others, recent presidents of the day.
And saying, we know where the chocolate biscuits are kept in this house.
But
most important thing.
I did 4 drafts in an attempt to woo you in, right? And ultimately I chose, instead of Dear Dr. McAleese, Dear Professor McAleese, Dear Chancellor, Dear Mary.
Mary's grand.
That's the one. That's who you are, I think, is the point.
Well, it's a republic.
You describe everyone else in very human ways.
I don't like carrying titles, to be honest.
Yeah.
Particularly titles of who you were once. upon a time.
But that's part of why we admire you so much. I know the sentiment. Like, I can't really convey in this moment
Well, thank you.
the number of like comments and feedback, you know, points of contact I've had over the last number of months, just to say, how do we have Mary McAleese coming around?
Well, thank
know?
you so much.
And it's been fantastic, and I'm unashamed about my emotional manipulation and all the rest. But I do recognise the combo. I'm not trying to fall foul of a
Right.
Pope John Paul faux pas here by saying it's really all about Martin,
that
isn't
man
it?
came on a
But-
promise of lunch.
But you, yeah.
Seriously?
And we'll give you.
You
But
promised
you
us
do
lunch.
work. You do work together, I think, is the point. I recognise that even through your own memoir, you know, depictions and articulations.
Well, listen, thank you so much. You've been very patient. You really have. And say, that man there is sitting looking at me going, my stomach now thinks that my throat is cut.
So can I award you one of our two
Oh.
presidential citations, which I have the honour
Oh,
of
thank
having
you.
the option of awarding
Thank
it
you.
to
Wow.
president.
Thank you.
There's no more worthy candidate
Thanks,
than yourself.
Damien.
You have many
You're
many
so
accolades.
good. God bless you.
No,
You're so good.
like,
Thank you,
you've
Damien.
no idea. You've no idea.
Thank you. Thank you.